let me say this about it. First of all, this book is absolutely chocked, filled with theology. Absolutely full. That's what it is, a theology book. Here's where I would make a distinction, and this is where I would say be careful. It's not a systematic theology book. There's systems of theology you can find and work your way through from God's Word, but it's a theology book. And so study God's Word for the study of God, for theology, and then be careful how you make your systems and how you force your systems to kind of come out of it, right? A guy came up to me after that service, he was weeping. And he said, I've been caught up in this for so long in my life. Because what I was talking about, it's easy to study God's Word and talk about God's Word. It's much more difficult to live God's Word. And what I find so often is that people love to spend hours and hours and hours talking about their little box, right? They got it all figured out. It all fits in the little box. But it's not making any difference in their life. And if it's not making any difference in your life, your discussion about systematic theology is a waste of time. It needs to be, how does it impact you? How is it changing you? So if you want to talk about tulips and be a good Calvinist, you go right ahead. If you want to talk about Daisy and be a good Arminian, I don't think you can be, but you can try, okay? But you know what? You go for it. But study God's Word for how is it going to change my life? Not, can I argue about the sovereignty of God and how I've got God figured out? Because I sure don't have God figured out. And just when I think I do, something happens. He blows me away. I'm thrown into I got to trust God more kind of a situation. And so often at those points, my little boxes, they really struggle. So back to then, what is Calvinism and Arminianism? One of you in this room came up to me after a service one Sunday and said, I talked about this actually in church, said, I can't tell if you're an Arminian or a Calvinist. That was probably the greatest compliment that person could have possibly given. Not that I'm not, and I know what I am, and I'll tell you about my badges if you really want to know. But the reality is, I believe that my responsibility is to preach the gospel. To preach the gospel. Do I know who's going to get caught in the net? I don't have the foggiest idea who's going to get caught in the net. Not my job to know who's going to get caught in the net. That's God's job to get caught in the net. James MacDonald does an interesting thing. He says, the door to heaven, on the one side it'll say, whosoever will may come. And then when you get on the other side, it'll see no one before him, in him before the foundation of the world. So here's what I just kind of go to, here's the challenge of all of this. I think when we look at theology, sometimes we try to look at it from two perspectives at the same time. And this is a tension, taking them apart. But you take a look at theology from, well, what does God, well, if God is sovereign, then those things are true. Well, if God is sovereign, those things are true. But I'm not God, and I'm not in heaven. And so my job is to be here, and whosoever will may come. And for God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, and so on, and all the rest. And I'm not going to worry too much about trying to dismantle other people's verses to make my argument nice and strong. I'm going to go back to, what's my job? My job is to understand the word as best I can, love Jesus with all my heart, and put the word out there for people. And just go through the word, what does it say? We went through, when I first came here, we went through Ephesians chapter 1, and we talked about election, and we talked about all those things, and we'll come back to them. I'm thinking about doing a series next year in the book of Romans, and believe me, we're going to go through some really cool stuff when we get into Romans. I'm just not sure I'm ready to bite that thing off. So, but let's take Romans, let's take the year and go through it as a church, and we'll hit on all of the different theological things as we go. But I would just say, be careful in your desire to know God's word, that your desire doesn't end up to know a system. Try to understand who awesome God is. And live with the tension. The tension's okay. Life is filled with tension. And but you still want to know, right? So I like on Sunday, like, don't wear your badge. Get your badges. Throw your badges away. People say, are you reformed? Yeah, you got to define what reformed is before I can tell you if I is that, right? Because there's so many different views of what is reformed or what is a Calvinist, or what most of you in the room wouldn't even like some of the stuff Calvin believed. So we're all okay with the tulip thing, as an article really was being written, probably for him more than by him, on the tulip being an answer to Arminianism. Arminianism basically was a view that said that we don't have eternal security. You can lose your salvation, and that the gospel is for everyone in the world equally. Those would be some kind of general tenets for Arminianism. And the general tenets for the tulip, for the Calvinists, would be that God is totally sovereign. Man is absolutely deprived. Unless God works in your heart, you don't come to know Christ, and you will persevere to the end. Those would be kind of the general tenets of yeah, I'm over here. I really am. So that's the badge, but I put it on my t-shirt, not on my sweatshirt, right? And why do we want to make that the thing? The guy that I talked with a couple weeks ago in church, his struggle was, I've got so bound up in this stuff that it's not, my life's not being impacted by God's word anymore, because I'm too worried about trying to dot my I's and cross my T's. And so